Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Hello again, and welcome to Native Art Voices of the Four Corners. Today we have another artist in from the Four Corners. Her name is Victoria J Yazzie.
I'm Hoatlana, born for the Toiheadlini clan, and I've lived in Farmington all my life.
Good to have you here, and today we're going to talk about, the art process and how we exist as Native artists here in the Four Corners community, which includes Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. So can you tell me a little bit about the kind of art that you do?
Well, I do different types of art, but mostly I work with fabric textiles. I'm a seamstress. I've been a seamstress since a young child, watching my grandmother and my mom sew clothes. So that was my inspiration. Then I started working in a fabric store in high school where I was able to make my own clothes, which was a good thing at the time because, teenagers want something different than everybody else. So that's how I started. And then I also do some beadwork and I do some acrylic paint.
Okay, so you're kind of a multidisciplinary artist, or a multimedia artist is what they call it too, where you don't stick to one type of art genre. You kind of go into the other areas, which I think is really common among Navajo people. Within even my own family, we have weavers, we have that also, paint, or else they do gardening. So we kind of have this multifaceted skill set as Navajo people. And you mentioned that your grandmother, who taught you how to sew?
Well, I watched my grandma sew. She sewed on the treadle machine before they had electric machines. But I could never get that. She was trying to show me. I just wasn't coordinated to get the wheel going with the pedal. So I ended up doing the electric one, which was better. And then I just basically taught myself. And when I had questions, my mom would help me out here and there. But self-taught basically. And then in high school, they had a class, which was a tailoring class, which was really nice. And that was for two semesters, and I did learn quite a bit from there. I benefited from learning how to do that.
So it sounds like your family has always been artistic, and you've watched them model how to create art. And that's very common too, the artist stories I've heard. Speaking of your grandmother and your mother, and then now you, how do you feel that you generationally as women artists in the community represent our community in the Four Corners? How does your art stand out and kind of identify you all, do you feel?
It shows who we are as an individual, how we incorporate the fabrics into different ways. And so I've done quite a few quilting and seen my grandma do it to my mom. So now I've incorporated the quilting aspect into applique, into upcycling denim, and that's a new thing that I started. But I also still do the traditional 3-tier skirts and then the velveteen shirts. And also they used to use the dimes or the real silver buttons, but I've used the more commercial, they call them umbrella button studs that you put on, or now I'm starting to use buttons in it. So that's kind of a more modern version in that.
So you make garments that are based on traditional Navajo, I guess, styles and motifs, sounds
Yes.
like. Working as an artist within the Four Corners, do you have a place that you make these items, or do you have a studio? How do you work?
I don't have a studio, but I have my own makeshift little studio in my living room. So that's basically how I would like to have a studio, but I just have an area in my living room that's designated for my sewing area, and that works for me.
Do you have a hope to maybe have a studio sometime where you can do all these different types of artworks?
Oh, that is my dream, to have a studio where I can have laid out in the area where I can have more space instead of having to move things and put stuff up away. Yes, that is a dream of mine.
Well, it sounds like you really keep busy in your living room.
I do.
Yeah.
That I can watch.
Yeah, that's what I've heard a lot of artists say. They like to watch other YouTubers doing their artwork or doing DIY, videos. So during that time we were watching these YouTube videos, we just went through the pandemic, and then they closed down pretty much most of the world. And even here in the Four Corners, we had our own little shutdown. So as an artist, what did you do during that time when we were inside our homes and not going to places to visit or do business?
Well, that gave me an opportunity to look through my supplies I've had. So I was able to do a lot of beading and construct earrings and necklaces from stuff that I had in my stash, which broke down my stash. And I also started doing some painting with my acrylic paints, which was good, and that was a good way to express some of my artistry during the pandemic, where I was not feeling confined too much. So I was able to create it during that time.
By doing that, it helped you kind of get through the pandemic process?
Yes, because I get lost. You kind of get caught up into your creation of what you're doing in your creative world, and your ideas start just coming, and so it's free flowing. So yeah, it really did help. I didn't really think of it as being confined into a space where I was just able to create, and that was my zone during that time. So it really did help in that area.
I've heard a lot of artists say that during the pandemic they really went headfirst into the art process. So a lot of them would go into their studios if they had it, or they would go outside and they would just find sort of their solace or their peace, so they didn't have so much anxiety about what was going on in the world. Saying that you went into this zone, what was that about? Do you feel like it was like a tangible experience, or do you think that being in that zone and doing your art, how do you look at that process?
To me, it's like a type of stress reliever. It takes away all the anxiety of stuff that's going on around, so I'm able to create. And then also it made me to where I was able to look into my stash and what I had, beans that I couldn't go out and get the stuff that I needed. So it made me more resourceful of the stuff that I had within my stash, and thinking of different ways to use those items that I do have. So yeah, it just opened up another way of creativity.
So do you feel like you're an artist that's very conscious about the environment? And it sounds like you're very aware of where you gather your materials for your art process, whether you're making clothing or, like you said, doing paintings. Are you one of those artists that collects like empty bottles, or saves paper because you're like, I'm going to use it again next time? Because I'm an artist like that also. But where does sustainability, I guess, play a role in your art process?
Well, I guess where it started from is seeing my mom and my grandma, which, my grandma would take the string out of the flour sacks and she would roll them up and save them and use them in her rugs or whatever it may be. And my mom in the same sense. And then also my dad, he would make use of different things, like, wow, how, so I was able to see how they were reusing stuff. And so that's what I do, and I used to work as an archaeologist, so yes, I did pick up bottles. We would go to the trash dumps and find these old bottles, and I use a lot of them in my decor now. And then also I like to recycle clothing, which I'm doing denim. I recycle denim jackets and embellish them and applique on them, or take them apart and piece them together. And that's what I'm doing now, is upcycling denim and repiecing them and putting them together. And so yeah, I like to upcycle and reuse things that don't go into the landfill and not be used, just give it new life to where someone else can appreciate it for a while longer.
I know here in the Four Corners, we're really hyper vigilant about, pollution a lot of times, and taking care of the land and making sure that, we don't have garbage all over the trails or the roadways. So I think it's really great that you're, really understanding that, you can reuse art materials, and that you don't always have to go to, these art department stores where you can buy materials. You can actually reuse materials. I think that's really good to hear, because, looking at our grandparents in our family lineage, we really did have family members that really did reuse materials. And that's how we learned about recycling, or they call it now upcycling. I also remember that when the bluebird flour sack was very much a staple in a lot of Navajo homes, and the flour came in these, it still does, it comes in these cotton bags. So Navajos would be, and still do, make clothes out of those, or they make them for their purses. Like you said, they take out the strings and they reuse them. I remember my great-grandmother also, when she was piercing my cousin's ears, she got the string that was stitched together with the bluebird flour sack, which was a cotton string, and she pierced my cousin's ears, and then she put a piece of turquoise, with the string, and then she strung that bluebird cotton string through my cousin's ear, and then she tied it off, and then so she had her pierced ears, and then every time she would move it, help it heal. That's how I remember her reusing materials.
Yes,
so it's really great that I know people are still doing that, because it's really important that we be conscious of where our materials are being used to make our art. A lot of times in Navajo art, our art has a story. It's the narrative of the art. So, it's historical, and through the years, people paint different in different times of the eras, I guess. So for you, as you're creating your different art pieces, how do you feel like those art pieces are going to represent you as an individual, but also your tribe, or just the people in general in the Southwest community a couple years down the line?
What I'm getting into right now is I want to start, like I said, doing the applique and incorporating the quilting. So what I did is I did my first wall hanging out of fabric, kind of using the quilting method to make a third phase type rug as a wall hanging. So now I'd like to incorporate that into upcycling of a denim jacket. And then I also want to do the different types of rug designs, possibly into jackets, which I think will carry on. And I know a lot of young people would like to have something that has more of their native flair to modernized clothing, which denim, I believe, is widespread through the different cultures and different ages. So it can be appreciated by our people and non-natives also too.
Even though we live in the Four Corners and we're kind of isolated from these really big urban areas, we still have access to having trendy clothes and kind of knowing what pop culture is doing, like in the East Coast and the West Coast. And I think that's really neat that you're sort of indigenizing American popular clothing, but then turning and putting a certain uniqueness on that clothing. So these rug designs that you're talking about, can you talk a little bit about where the origin of these rug designs are? Are you using your own designs? Are you using family designs? Or what's the origin on those designs that you're thinking of putting?
My grandma and my mom and my auntie, who lives with me now, have been weavers, and I started doing some needlepoint cross stitch, and so I was interested in learning more about the weaving of Navajo. So I started looking and studying about the first phase, second phase, third phase. So those are the first cross stitch that I did, and that's how I got interested in it. And so looking at my grandma and my mom and my auntie's rugs, it's like that would be nice to incorporate into. Since I'm not a weaver, I would love to learn, but I could manipulate the fabric into doing things like that, which I use the quilting method also along with the applique, and then incorporating rick-rack, which is it's a fabric trim that a lot of seamstress are used to, not so much anymore, but I incorporate that into the fabric. And then also I use a little bit of what I talked about earlier, the umbrella buttons, to embellish that, which gives it a little bit more design to it. In that way, I would like to use buttons too, which they did on garments, like the velveteen garments. They would use buttons. The silversmith would use the dimes or quarters. So now I'd like to use the abalone buttons that are manufactured, today, but adding some turquoise or different things with it onto garments, as well as my rug designs too.
I can already visualize it in my head. And what's interesting about your narrative concerning these garments is that, you have a family lineage of weavers who are using wool, and then you weave some, but not really, it sounds like. You do seamstress work. So you're incorporating these sort of traditional Navajo women's utilitarian work of weaving and turning it and mixing it up into an urban way of creating textiles, which is sewing. Yes. So I think that's really nice because, art has to elevate itself every year, every generation, so it doesn't stay stagnant, yes. Right? Even though we had Navajo women weaving in, the late 1800s, they're still weaving now. Some of them are weaving the same designs, but some of them have put in their own aesthetic art inspiration. Mm-hmm. So the art is still weaving, but it's a little bit different. Yes. So I kind of see, it's really nice how you're saying you're going to do this with your denim jacket. So it's really great. Now, I thought I heard you say in the beginning of this interview that you also do some painting. Yeah, so how did you get into painting, and where do you see your subject matter going in the painting?
I did take a class at the college, a beginning art class. I think it was color theory I took, actually. So I was always interested in art, but I thought that would be nice. So I learned how to mix colors and how to do depth and stuff like that. And I never really did anything, but I had some paintings that I did that I had on the wall. I thought I should just try something. So I started some plants, because I love house plants. And then I thought cactus would be nice. So I did some cacti, and then I also did some animals, like little cats and whatever, but because people love cats. And so then I started incorporating the word Musa Navajo on them, and then the different words, did some sheep. And then I also did those in pillows, which I did applique on denim pillows too. So it kind of just mixes and blends in with each other, what I do on the painting as well as my sewing, the applique. So that's how I got started in it, just mixing of colors. And then also watching my niece who paints, also watching her create what she does, it just kind of inspired me, like, hey, I should do something too. Actually, she's the one who just gave me a little bit of a bump and saying, just do it, why not create it? You're able to do it and you enjoy doing it, so do it. So yeah, that's.
I heard you mention houseplants. Here in Farmington, we don't have so many cactus, I don't think, unless it's just cactus that you can buy from a local gardening shop. But I know if you go a little bit higher or lower in elevation between New Mexico here, you could go walk outside and see all kinds of cactus. So how did you get inspired to paint cactus? Because cactus is a succulent, yes. And it's a pretty rare plant because it's only in the desert areas. And I noticed that's become really trendy to have in your home nowadays. What got you inspired to paint cactus?
Well, like I said before, I worked as archaeologist for the Navajo Nation. So I was able to go to different areas on the reservation as, west, into Arizona, and seeing mostly prickly pear and yucca and stuff like that. But then we also worked in the Carson National Forest, which was it was just an eye-opener for me, not only seeing the different barrel cactus there also, but then also being able to survey and look at some of the old Navajo sites during the time when they were fleeing and being chased and pursued. So that was just very inspiring to me to see how our native people, our ancestors, lived out there, and just looking at the plant system around where they lived. And that's kind of how I started liking plants and wanting to paint the succulents and cacti plants. So
we as visual artists, we paint what we know, or we mimic what we see in nature, whether it be a skyscape or plant life, flora and fauna. We want to paint that because it's in our memory. Yeah. They call it, like genetic memory. We remember those things from our lives 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think we try to recreate those images for our own personal gratification, and also like our spirit or our soul, right? Because a lot of times people who love nature, when they think about being in nature, it brings a peace to their to their mind, and it brings this really beautiful feeling. And so I think a lot of artists, and it sounds like you do this too, recreate those moments in their artwork. And I think that's really important because that's a part of our native story within the Southwest. You know, if you and I were from Michigan, our story about plants might be different, and our story about life in the Four Corners, of course, it would be so different. So I think that's important to acknowledge, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because being a Navajo artist in the Four Corners, we are very unique. Our art cannot be made anywhere else but the Four Corners. So as an artist, Victoria, or a multimedia artist, how do you feel your art and the process in which you do your art brings another level or another chapter to the whole narrative of Navajo identity in the community? Like, what do you feel like your art is bringing to the overall view of Navajo art? Because we're insiders, but you have people who live in Germany, Japan, wherever, and they're looking at us and saying, oh, look, there's these artists. So we kind of take it for granted sometimes. So how do you feel like your art can represent us as a kind of as a whole in the community here as Native artists?
Well, I think it can let other people know that we are aware of, same things that they are aware of, like sustainability and recycling, upcycling, and being aware of our surroundings and trying to protect things that don't need to be thrown into the landfill. We can repurpose and think mindfully of what we're going to buy. As far as, I'd rather give something new life than go get something fast fashion. And I've looked at some videos concerning the fast fashion, and it's really sad to see that, items are bought and then just discarded and made very quick and not to last, So if you look at an item, you may pay a little bit more, but it's going to last you a lot longer. And if you get something that's more personalized and has like art on it, then you'll be more aware of like, hey, I'm going to hang on to this, or maybe somebody else might want this. And so you give that garment more life, and they will see in different areas that we are also, as Native people, aware of that. And I think we always have been, but it's just in a more modern way to where they can see it differently in that way. And then plus it can help the younger generation to hopefully see that we can change different things, little things, and be able to be more aware of that area of not being so wasteful in that sense.
It's good to teach the new generations about sustainability and upcycling, because a lot of times they want the newest thing that's being advertised in our community. So you mentioned, like I said, your mother and your grandmother. I'm assuming you knew them as an adult, and so when you look back now at the way they were making their art, whether it be weaving or sewing, what do you think art brought to them? Why do you think they did art in the first place?
I think it's because they have we have a creative gene inside of us, and we just, as natives, it just comes to us. That's what I believe, and it just comes out in whatever we do, not specifically art items that we make, but as seeing my grandma, my mom do different things in the household, how they, maybe handled how to, like my grandma would make kneel down bread and how she would do things a certain way. There was a certain art just watching the way she would fold the husk over that corn and how she would grind the corn and how she would place the rocks and just everything. There was art form to it in a way where she looked at it and did it in a way that it was artful. And my mom in the same way. She would make clothing, and this was during the polyester days and stuff, and she would make an outfit, and with what was left over, she wouldn't just throw it. She would make another outfit for, say, my niece, and so they would have matching outfits. And so that's kind of how I learned how to not throw stuff away, how you can reuse it, or you can reuse it to make pot holders or different things, whatever, every scrap is usable in some way. So, watching them do that, they were teaching me in a way which I didn't know at that time was actually repurposing. And I didn't know that's what it was, but that's kind of, I just grew up learning it and seeing it. And my father would do the same thing. He was a carpenter. and he would say pieces of wood. And actually, I'm kind of dabbling in some woodwork now too. And my son got me a miter saw, so now I'm kind of headed that direction too.
I think what seems important about what you're sharing in your story about art and your family is that you'd like the rest of the world to understand that we as Indigenous people of this Four Corners community are very aware of how we create art and the materials we use, and that sustainability is very important to us because we know the land is important to us and we don't want to see it polluted. Is that kind of where you're going with this sharing of your knowledge?
Yes, I believe so. And then being an archaeologist, I would have never seen the areas that I've seen on the reservation that are so beautiful, and it's sad to see people not being aware of the beauty that's out there and how we can have something beautiful to see out there if we are aware of how to take care of it in small ways will help.
And I think you speaking from a different generation than, millennials now, which I've interviewed before, I don't hear the same conversation from them as I do from you. There's a real awareness of elements of the land, and then societal issues of pollution, and then also responsibility. So I think it's really nice to hear someone talk about how their art can possibly affect the land in a positive or a negative way. But I think that's one topic that I think needs to be discussed more when we talk about the art process, especially here in the Four Corners, because we have people that come to our land here from around the world just to see the natural wonders that are in the landscape, whether they be sandstone buttes or the rivers that run through the high desert or our mountainscapes. It's really important that we show them that we are still interested in sustainability, and we are interested in keeping the land free of pollutants. So I think that will end our conversation about the art process, and with artist Victoria J. Yazzie from Farmington. And until next time, this is Native Art Voices of the Four Corners. Hagonat.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.